Have you ever stopped to think about what happened to the bodies after the Romans won a battle? The scene wasn't one of immediate celebration, but something much darker and more revealing. Bodies scattered on the ground, broken weapons reflecting the sun, the smell of fresh blood in the air, and a heavy silence, interrupted only by the cries of the wounded. Very few people know, but for the Romans, war didn't end when the enemy fell. What came next was a calculated process that blended military logistics, religion, and politics. And in this context, there was one priority that could determine the future of the entire army: finding those who were still breathing among the dead. Right after victory, organized groups would comb every inch of the battlefield in search of wounded soldiers. It was a race against time, but also against the very logic of war. Few people imagine it, but Rome didn't simply abandon its men to fate. Military doctors, known as medici, would approach through blood and dust to provide first aid. These weren't pure acts of compassion. Every soldier saved could fight again, march in future campaigns, and strengthen the war machine that never stopped. Can you grasp the coldness of the strategy? Life was valuable, it was a military resource. For more serious cases, there were the valetudinaria, true mobile hospitals set up near the battlefield. There, improvised surgeries, quick amputations, and rudimentary treatments aimed to turn fatal wounds into scars that still allowed a man to wield a sword. The Roman logic was cold. Saving lives was less about compassion and more about efficiency. The empire needed soldiers to sustain its war machine, and every legionary saved meant more strength for the next battle. But when nothing more could be done, one final step remained just as essential: accurately recording those who would never march again. Officers would move slowly through the field, passing from body to body, focused on a crucial detail. Each Roman soldier carried a small lead object, the signaculum. This disc, worn around the neck or attached to the body, contained personal information that allowed identification even after death. A detail that seems simple but was revolutionary for its time. Thanks to it, the legions could maintain exact loss records, inform distant families, and, most importantly, ensure that this man wouldn't vanish as just another anonymous number on the battlefield. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? An officer kneeling down, removing the cold lead disc from a soldier's chest, writing down his name so he would be remembered, while around him, hundreds of others awaited the same fate. It was a gesture that mixed military duty with respect for memory. After all, for Rome, honor didn't end with life. Even in death, the legionary was still part of the empire's machinery. When the counting of the dead was over, a grim and inevitable task began: dealing with the bodies. The Romans knew that leaving corpses exposed was not only an affront to dignity but also a health risk for the army. Thus, men were assigned to dig mass graves, where anonymous soldiers were laid side by side, or to build funeral pyres that consumed in flames what remained of the battle. But not all were buried the same way. There were burial funds, known as collegia funeratia, maintained by the soldiers' own contributions, which ensured a proper burial even for those without close family. Simple tombs, marked only by stones, were enough to preserve the memory of the legionary and secure him a place in history. Officers, due to their rank and prestige, received grand monuments and memorials, like the one at Clyci, built under Emperor Trajan, which still stands today as a witness to both the greatness and brutality of that era. The urgency to bury or burn the bodies wasn't only a military practice. It had deep roots in Roman religiosity. It was believed that those left unburied would wander eternally, unable to find peace. For the Romans, victory was only complete when even the dead had found their fate. But once the rites were finished, a new challenge loomed for the army: the survival of the living. Days after the battlefield became an invisible threat. Remnants of blood, flesh, and human fragments attracted insects and contaminated the soil, turning the area into fertile ground for epidemics. Rome could not allow the glory of victory to be tainted by silent plagues. So military engineers, the Fabri and Architecti, took on the task of restoring order. They organized the removal of waste, spread quicklime to disinfect the ground, and worked to make the space usable once again. But the Romans didn't see only risk in what remained of the enemy. There was also opportunity. Broken weapons were collected. Damaged shields were sent to mobile workshops. And even the metal from defeated enemies was melted down and repurposed. Nothing was wasted. Even the belongings of fallen Roman soldiers could be redistributed and turned into resources. This practice revealed the pragmatism of the empire. Nothing was lost. Everything could be turned into a resource. And it was in this very spirit that one of the most anticipated moments for soldiers emerged. The looting. Once silence took over the battlefield, the legionaries would spread out among the bodies in search of anything valuable. Coins hidden in pouches, rings pulled from fingers, still sharp weapons, and even clothes that could be reused. Everything was collected. For the common soldier, this act wasn't just greed, but a practical acknowledgement of his bravery. Risking one's life in the name of Rome, in return, granted the right to claim part of the spoils of war. But this right wasn't unlimited. Generals kept a watchful eye to ensure that looting didn't cross the line of what was acceptable. After all, plunder had to remain under discipline. Otherwise, what was meant as a reward could quickly turn into chaos. That's why strict rules were enforced, the distribution of spoils was supervised, and it was clearly determined what belonged to the soldier and what had to be delivered to the state treasury. It was a fine line between reward and disorder. But there was one thing that could not be repurposed: the bodies of the defeated enemies themselves. And this is where Rome revealed its most political and ruthless side. Peoples considered respectable adversaries, like the Carthaginians or Gauls, could be granted honorable burials. This wasn't a simple act of compassion, but a strategy of prestige. By recognizing the dignity of the enemy, Rome demonstrated to the world that it was not only the dominant military power, but also the holder of moral authority. But the fate was very different for rebels and revolting slaves. For them, there was no mercy. Their bodies were left exposed to the sun, the rain, and the birds of prey. A brutal reminder of the price of disobedience. Imagine marching down a Roman road and seeing, day after day, rows of decomposing corpses. It wasn't just punishment, it was pedagogy through terror. And then there were the defeated leaders, whose destinies were even more symbolic. Many had their bodies mutilated, and their heads were taken to Rome as trophies, displayed in public squares or triumphal processions. They served as material proof of victory. Can you imagine the crowd gathering, gazing upon the lifeless face of a former enemy leader, now turned into a spectacle for the masses? For Rome, it wasn't enough to win. It had to make it undeniably clear that all rival power had been crushed, even in the afterlife. Once the battlefield had been cleared and the bodies consigned either to oblivion or to memory, the most solemn moment arrived: the lustratio. This purification ritual involved animal sacrifices, prayers to the gods, and symbolic processions. The goal was to cleanse the army of the spiritual contamination caused by mass death. But the final consecration of victory didn't happen on the battlefield. It took place in Rome. The triumph was the pinnacle. The general marched through the capital streets, surrounded by soldiers, displaying chained prisoners, mountains of spoils, and in some cases, even the mortal remains of defeated leaders. It was spectacle, politics, and religion interwoven into a single grand act. The entire city witnessed the transformation of violence into official glory. The Romans showed that winning a battle was just one part of something much bigger. They turned the chaos of war into a ritual of discipline, politics, and faith, where even the dead had a role in the machinery of the empire. That's why Rome wasn't just a military empire, but a civilization that knew how to transform blood and suffering into power and legacy. Now, I want to know your opinion. What impresses you the most? Rome's cold efficiency, or the way even death served to reinforce the empire's power? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more epic content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. In the video appearing on your screen, we reveal what happened to the last Roman soldiers after the fall of Rome.